This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
This week on Saturday Morning Breakfast, we are talking about taking our classrooms beyond accessible and into inclusive. What does it actually mean to make sure that we are operating an inclusive environment for all of our young people?
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is Saturday the 12th of April 2025. I am your host Darren Lester, and you are here on Teachers Talk Radio having breakfast with me on this fine Saturday morning. How are you all? I hope you are doing well. I can't believe it's been an entire week since we were last here having breakfast together. I think this has been the fastest week of the year so far, of the calendar year 2025, of the academic year 2024-2025. This week has just flown by. It has been insane how quickly this week has gone. And like I said, I can't believe it's been a whole week since we were last here talking about classroom aesthetics. I hope that if you were in school this week, if you've only just broken up for the Easter holidays, that the same can be said for you. I hope that if you have spent your week on holiday, then the opposite can be said for you, and this week has crawled. I know that that's not true, but I can still send out the good intentions. I can still send out the good vibes. I think one of the reasons that this week has gone so quickly for me personally is that I'd set myself a new challenge this week, and I've been exploring TikTok. And I don't understand it. I'm just going to be very upfront. I do not understand it. Let's contextualize some things right now. I am an elder millennial, apparently. 1985, so that puts me kind of almost at the top end of the millennials. Not quite, but almost. I have to scroll through the years a little bit longer than I would like when I need to type in my date of birth anywhere. But that's all fine. So, I grew up through that social media boom. Not quite young enough for it to have been nativized and for it to have been a permanent fixture of my life, but young enough that it has been a fixture since my formative years. I think I set up my first MySpace when I was in sixth form, back in the days when you actually had to learn to code in order to operate social media. And nobody taught us coding in school because it wasn't computer science back in the day. It was ICT, and we learned very useful office skills. We taught ourselves coding so that we could upload pictures of our lunch to show people. So kind of that's where I'm coming from. And, I've never been good with social media. I have never been good with social media. It's something that my agent has always hated as well. The fact that I just can't do it. And I think, well, actually, to be fair, that's not entirely true. So back in the day, when long form content was the thing, I was good at that. I kept a blog. I enjoyed my blog. I was good at writing lengthy MySpace posts. I can do long form content. If you've listened to even one of these Saturday morning shows, you will know that I don't do brevity. I can't keep it short. I like my long form content. So then, when we made that transition from blogging, even in like fanish spaces, when we all had LiveJournal, and then we migrated to Tumblr, and kind of that was where we kept our geeky spaces, it was still all really long form content. And then that gradually got shorter, and we transitioned to the microblogging platforms, to Twitter, X, latterly over to Blue Sky. And, that was where we had, or back when we had our 140 character limits. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't. 140 characters was not enough for me to say what I wanted to say. And I know, keep it brief. That means that you're getting your message across and you understand your topic well enough to shorten it down for people and all that jazz. But no, I like to take my time. But eventually, I watched not the death of those platforms, because that's kind of just coming about now, but the transition from those platforms, from written platforms, which is really where I've always been most comfortable, to vocal platforms. So suddenly everybody was on YouTube when that became more accessible. And that went back to long form content, which I enjoyed. Everybody was making these epic 30-minute documentaries about how they went to Tesco or Sainsbury's or Aldi or whichever of the many supermarkets you may frequent. And I liked that because it was back to long form content, but I didn't particularly want to put myself out there on video, because by this time I was out of the theatre and I was training to teach, and I understood that there was the possibility for this weird kind of overlap between those two sections of my life that I wasn't really ready for. So I kind of didn't embrace YouTube as a content creator. I did as a consumer. And in fact, I always, when I'm sitting here hosting, I always have some kind of YouTube video on muted in the background just for company. I quite often have it just playing. But I never really embraced it. And then, of course, Instagram came along with its Reels. So we then went from long form video content into short form video content. So we were now combining two things that I absolutely did not want to do, which was video content and making it short. And then that has led us to TikTok. And I think that's why I don't understand it, is because it's a video and it's short. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of the things that I am seeing, I don't understand why they need to be videos. Because a lot of the stuff that is coming up on my FYP, I now know what an FYP is. Does this go on my professional development? Is this CPD that I can now define FYP? I think it ought to be. It's kind of me keeping up with the kids. Although, to be fair, they may have moved on by now. Their social media moves way, way faster than they did back in the day. But it's like that. I've seen variations of the same video, which is somebody looking at me and pouting and then putting a caption up on the screen. And I'm kind of like, well, why did this need to be a video? Why could this not have been a tweet? Why could this not have been a blog post? Why can't we go back to what I felt comfortable doing? So yeah, I am still getting to grips with it. I am acknowledging the fact that it's only been a week. And in fact, it hasn't even been a week. I set up the TikTok while I was in the TTI meeting on Monday. So it's been like 5 days. I have created a bunch of content for it. I found some really cool ways to do that. So thank you to King Tom of TTR for directing me to, or directing us to, the different sites that we can use to kind of help turn the content that we create for you here on the podcast into things that is viable for TikTok. And that's been really fun. That's been really interesting. And there are educational benefits to it that I'm kind of playing around with, because apparently I can't do anything unless I attempt to relate it to the classroom. But so that's been quite fun. And so I guess, from that point of view, from my own enrichment, trying something different, pushing myself out of my comfort zone, my short so far experiment with TikTok has been a success. I do not understand it. I'm quite happy to tell you that I don't understand it. I will be interested to see whether, kind of as my experiment with it continues, whether I learn to understand it, whether I learn to like it. that will be seen. But I will keep you updated on that one. That's been about all I've done this week, I think, apart from, teaching. Um, that has been all that's been going on. I've done a couple of courses, which have been quite interesting. That's one of the benefits, actually, of my current role that I hadn't thought about when I transitioned to it. So, as long-term friends of the show will know, back in September for this academic year, I transitioned to an online school. So I'm still doing the odd bit of supply in brick and mortar schools to kind of make sure that I don't become one of those um, teachers with a platform who has forgotten what it's like to be a regular teacher in a brick and mortar school. But my predominant job these days is teaching in an online school, which I'm enjoying very much. It's given me a lot of flexibility over my schedule. And one of the things that I have been able to do is really ramp up the amount of CPD that I'm doing. Because there is so much on offer kind of across all of my different subjects, across my different areas, and across the things that I think, even wherever we are nearly 20 years into teaching, I still need some help with. And I've been able to schedule those in, because they are accessible. CPD is more accessible to us now, because we all moved online during COVID, and we kind of haven't gone back to exclusively in person, which is brilliant. And people offer their courses at all different times of the day. Now, the one thing that I have noticed, and one thing that we've been talking about a lot in MFL Journal Club, is the times at which different aspects of CPD are offered, because it's not offered in the school day anymore. You don't get a day off to go on a course anymore unless you're going in person. All of our synchronous online stuff is offered outside of school hours. So, was it Tuesday? I'm just looking over at my planner. Yeah, so Tuesday, I did a course from 5 until 7, and then I did a course from 7 until 8. So I took up a chunky portion of my evening, of my own time, to do that. Whereas, I don't know, 10 years ago, that would have been a half-day course somewhere that I might have taken Tuesday morning off of school to travel to and attend myself. And, in Journal Club, we've been talking about kind of how late is too late. How much of our own time should we expect to be giving up for CPD? Is there this expectation now that, as teachers, because a lot of what we can do for our professional development should be done online, and I say should be because that enables us to connect with so many more people, not just within our own contexts, but from across the country, across the world, so that we can work together, learn from each other. But it's really difficult to find times to make that happen. When I this is just turning into a big advert for Journal Club, isn't it? But come along to Journal Club. If you are an MFL teacher, we have a great time. You can sign up on the TTR website. It's free. I send you out the article each month to read. We meet, we chat about it. It is a good time. But yeah, it has been difficult to kind of figure out the best day, the best time, because there's never going to be something that suits everybody. And so I think, as I think about CPD, because I'm writing a section on CPD as well for my thesis at the moment, as well as thinking about all the extras that I can do, it is quite interesting to think about what we should be expected to do, the time that we should be expected to give up, what we are willing to do, what we are willing to give up, and that willingness is going to be different for everybody, and even within the same person, it might be different at different stages of your career, depending on what setting you're in, just depending on what mood you're in, to be honest. But I think there is a broader conversation that we're not going to have today, but that should be had within education, about CPD, because there are so many opportunities. There is so much cool stuff that people are offering long form talks on, that we can attend. And I think we do need to be thinking in this country about the hours that we are putting in and what we get in exchange for that. That was going to be a really good segue into the news, but I've just thought of something else that I wanted to say. Because in other countries, you either have to do or you are recommended to do, or whatever it is, a certain number of CPD hours. And, quite often you will do a course and it will tell you this is worth 2 CPD hours. We don't kind of have that so much in teaching in the UK. We don't have any obligations, but in the same way, we don't have any macro benefits. We go along to CPD to improve our own teaching, to improve our own knowledge, whatever it might be, but that is very rarely recognized at a professional level. We just do it because we want to, because we feel that we need to. And so I am wondering if maybe instituting some kind of thing where even within individual schools, you are entitled to X hours of CPD. If that happens to be in your own time after school, then you can take that time back, or whatever it might be. I wonder whether that would be a good way to get people engaged in CPD a bit more and to relieve any of the sting maybe that some people feel from giving up their own time to attend a lot of these really, really good, really, really interesting courses.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
According to a story on the BBC News website, more than 1/3 of secondary teachers have reported misogyny from pupils at their school in the last week. The BBC asked 6,000 secondary teachers about their experiences via the survey tool TeacherTap. About 40% of the teachers who responded also said they felt ill-equipped to handle this type of conduct. The government says it has published guidance for teachers on dealing with extreme ideologies and will protect children online. Teachers and parents are reported as saying they are increasingly worried about the misogynistic and violent content that children, especially boys, are being exposed to online. The survey results show that 39% of secondary teachers said they are aware of at least one incident of misogyny from a pupil in the last week. 1 in 10 said they were aware of more than one event, and 61% said they felt misogyny had increased since they started teaching. The report also focuses on research by UCL, which found teenage girls in England are significantly less likely to feel safe in school than their male peers since the pandemic. Further details and a case study from a school in Dudley can be found on the BBC News website. The BBC also reports that a former Dundee University principal has been named as the chairman of a new task force set up to help the struggling institution. Sir Alan Langlands will chair the new University of Dundee Strategic Advisory Task Force. The university faces cutting its workforce by 700 as it attempts to tackle a £35 million deficit. The Scottish Funding Council recently approved a £22 million support package for the university. An investigation has been launched into the reasons for the institution's deteriorating finances and how this came to be a surprise to the university's leadership. Unions have welcomed the announcement. Schools Week says a surge in schools making cuts shows they are rapidly heading towards the brink, and that this is threatening the government's promise to break down barriers to opportunity. A survey by the Sutton Trust says more schools are cutting teaching and support staff at this time more than any time since 2020. Nearly 1/2 of secondary school leaders said they are using pupil premium cash to plug gaps, the highest since the annual poll began in 2017. Schools Week revealed last month the funding issues schools face, including unfunded pay rises, increases to national insurance and other rising costs. The Sutton Trust said the findings, reported in detail in the article online, show Labour risks failing one of its own 5 missions, to break down barriers to opportunity for every child. Another key Labour pledge was to update the national curriculum, but 1/3 of secondary school leaders said they will reduce the choices they offer at GCSE because of funding constraints. The Sutton Trust is now calling for a new national strategy to close the attainment gap, including restoring the pupil premium to its full value, as it says this has fallen by 20% in real terms since 2014 to 15. A Department for Education spokesperson said, "The government has protected key education priorities through our plan for change." Finally, a team of 7 primary school pupils is hoping for success in the USA after qualifying for a World Robotics Tournament. Hartlepool Mail Online said the team from one of the town's primaries had been competing at regional and national levels since November and had made it through to the competition's final held next month in Dallas, Texas. The competition requires teams to design and build a robot able to hold and carry a ball, then score a goal as quickly as possible in 60 seconds. The primary is one of 3 schools representing the UK in the tournament. The team and local community have so far raised £12,500 of its £20,000 target needed to travel for the competition, and once in a lifetime opportunity. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. Really interesting roundup there of the news, as always. I've kind of been staying out of the misogyny and gender discussion that's been going on in light of, or in response to, I guess, Netflix's Adolescence. I think I made one comment on it, which was about how it was great that the show was being made available to be shown in schools, but there were going to be implications for that. And the reason that I'm kind of staying out of it is because I'm not well informed on gender issues particularly. It's not my area of expertise, and I think an uninformed opinion is often incredibly dangerous. But there is one thing that has been jumping at me over the last couple of weeks that I think is worth considering. And that is, over the past, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 years, we have made great strides in understanding that there are different masculinities. And, you know, it's much easier these days for young boys like I was, who are not very sporty, a little bit bookish, you know, different to the other boys, I suppose, to find role models. You know, because particularly in terms of celebrity, there are lots of male celebrities out there who are these days more willing to be themselves. You know, we've got Harry Styles, for example, with his very flamboyant dress sense. We have got the rise in drag culture for young boys who may be interested in that, young boys who may be wanting to experiment with their gender presentation as opposed to just wearing something a little bit flamboyant. You know, there are men out there these days who are being positive role models for young men kind of across the gender spectrum, across the masculinity spectrum. But I do think that one group of boys, ironically, who are kind of being left behind in that space are the boys who are looking up to people like Andrew Tate, the toxic masculinity influencers, if you like, because they are not seeing necessarily positive portrayals of that traditional stereotyped masculinity. We've kind of gone very much in the opposite direction, and we have seen, in an attempt to equalize masculinities and in an attempt to depict that masculinity spectrum, we've started to demonize that more traditional kind of rough and tumble masculinity. And so it's no wonder that the boys who are on that end of the spectrum are looking for role models wherever they can get them, and where it used to be that they would have everybody to look up to, where these days the traditional masculine role models are being less and less platformed. And it becomes cyclical, doesn't it, within society, that we start demonizing something, and so those people are less platformed, and so we demonize it even more. They're not seeing the positivity. They're not seeing the good people to look up to. They're being told that they should look up to these people that they don't resonate with, in the same way that I was being told that I had to look up to these footballers, these rock stars who I didn't resonate with. And if you are looking for somebody to look up to, you're going to go for whoever most matches your own presentation. So if all they're seeing in these kind of rough and tumble men are the ones who are misogynistic, the ones who are vocally anti-LGBTQ and whatever else they may be, then that's going to be what they adopt, because that's going to be how they think they should be. So I do think that a part of the conversation that we are missing is the fact that we need to platform a spectrum of people as positive role models to make sure that everybody has somebody to look up to. Which again is not to say that platforming these men who have kind of held the platform traditionally for the last 100 years should come at the expense of other people. It's about making sure there is room for everybody, which kind of is what my show is about today. Oh, look at that. It's almost like I plan my shows. Because I want to talk today about platforming everybody, about making sure that everybody can see themselves represented in the world that they live in. And so, yeah, There's no easy solution to this one, is there? Which is why there are debates about it. It's why there are shows about it. It's why it's why the default response is, oh, let teachers take care of it, because we have to take care of everything. But it is about making sure that everybody can see themselves being represented in a positive way. And it's about making sure that the platforms that are out there enable everybody to be represented in a positive way. However that may look, because, you know, the internet is a big space, particularly if you are only taking up 7 seconds of it with your video, because apparently that's what we do now. And so, you know, there is room for a lot of positive voices. There are opportunities for us to drown out the negative voices. And there is space for everybody if we will allow there to be space for everybody. There we go. That's my soapbox for today. That said, because, like I said, I am not particularly well informed on gender theory, on any of that sort of stuff. I did a little bit of it back in my English undergrad days, but I don't know it particularly well. So I do implore you, if you're interested in this sort of thing, to go and listen to people who do know what they're talking about, who are much better informed than I am. Tom, in fact, did a really good show a few weeks back called Masculinity, Misogyny and the Manosphere, What Schools Need to Know. That's a really interesting discussion that he had with a couple of guests. I forget who they were, but there was a really good conversation about how we can make sure that the boys who we are at risk of losing to the toxic influences can be kind of kept on the right side. And it's not about maligning them. It's not about telling them that they are wrong for looking up to these people. It's about making sure that we position them to find the right sorts of people to be looking up to. And it's about making sure that we are platforming people that they can look up to. So yeah, please do go back and check that show out. It's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's everywhere that you can get your shows, because it is a really good one to listen to. I, however, this week, I'm going to pick up kind of on where I left off last week. So my show last week was about the aesthetics of the classroom. And I was talking about whether our classrooms really need to be Instagrammable. Clearly, I've been on a bit of a social media crusade over the last couple of weeks. That's where all of this Instagram and TikTok talk is coming from. But that led to quite an interesting rabbit hole that I felt myself going down, which is pretty much how all my shows come about, to be fair. I just fall down a rabbit hole. I just click Wikipedia links and then end up somewhere that I never thought I would need to read about in my life, but it becomes the most fascinating thing ever. And in thinking about kind of classroom aesthetics, and particularly like classroom decoration, I was thinking about what that means for students who need extra accommodations. So, you know, if you have got really lovely beanbags and throw pillows in your classroom because you want to create a very warm, comfortable space, how does a student in a wheelchair, or how does a student with a guide dog navigate that? And so I then got myself to thinking, having constructed this straw man teacher, I got myself to thinking about what accessibility in the classroom actually means, and whether we have truly transitioned from accessibility to inclusivity. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, I'm going to recognize again that this is a big topic that I am in no way qualified to talk about. I'm not an SEN specialist. I am not a disability specialist by any stretch of the imagination. I am a language specialist who has done his modules on SEN and has been through the training and has done the CPD. So I'm approaching this not from a specialist point of view at all, and just as a run-of-the-mill teacher exploring what I've been able to learn. That I've said that to say that if you are listening live, or on playback, either way, and you are a specialist, if you are a disability advocate, if you are a Senko, and if I get something wrong, or if I oversimplify something, please do correct me, because I want to learn, and I want to make sure that, that we can all learn together, because I think that's really important. So if you're listening live via the Podbean app, you can text me. I will read your text out live on air and we can discuss that way. If you are listening live elsewhere or on playback, then you can send me a message via X or Blue Sky. I am at Mr. D. Lester. That's MRDLESTER on both. You can TikTok me now if that's a thing. I don't know if that's a thing, but if you want to record a short video and send it to me, then, I would feel very honoured that you would take time out of your day to do that. I am Mr. D. Lester 8 on there. I'm not entirely sure why I need to be 8. There are clearly 7 other Mr. D. Lesters that came before me. But you can get in touch with me there as well if you feel so inclined. We're going to start by defining some terms, because this is where my own specialism expertise come into play. You all know that I love me some language, and I love talking about language a little bit. And we understand that when talking about accessibility and inclusion, language is important. Language is part of accessibility and inclusion, but language also changes and terms change. So I am using what is considered by the Business Disability Forum to be the correct language usage for the UK in 2025. This very well could change. The language that I use today could very well be outdated by the end of this year, because terms change, because we understand things differently. So I just kind of want to caveat that the language that I'm using today is language that is correct as I'm recording it, and that's kind of the very best that I can do. And that's the very best that any of us can do. So if you kind of listen to this little bit where I explain the language that I'm going to use and you think, oh no, I've been using the incorrect language, I've been using the non-preferred language, don't beat yourself up over it, because that doesn't help anybody. Just make that decision to change, because that's all we can do. So keeping in mind that I am a UK-based person, speaking on a UK-based podcast, but aware that we are transmitted, we are listened to around the world, things get a little bit murky. So I'm just going to read this wholesale. I'm going to quote businessdisabilityforum.org.uk. I'll tweet this resource out afterwards for anybody who may be interested. But they say, generally, if writing for, or in this case speaking to, a UK audience, then disabled people is often preferred over people with disabilities. Disabled people recognises that people are disabled by society's response to them or by their long-term condition. This is called identity-first language. If communicating with a global audience, then people with disabilities is more widely used. This is called people-first language and emphasises the person over their disability. So, if you are in the UK speaking in a worldwide context, you kind of can't get it wrong. But it is important to think about the context in which you are speaking. It's also important to think about the individuals with whom and to whom you are speaking, because each disabled individual will have their own preference over identity first or person first, or not talking about it at all. So, if you're having one-on-one conversations or small group conversations with people, it's always best to make sure that you recognize how the person you are speaking with identifies. And let's be honest, that's true not just of disability, but of everything. It's not hard to ask how somebody else would like to be referred to. So I'm going to be very honest. I will probably mostly use people with disabilities. And that's because, to kind of emphasize or demonstrate what I've just talked about, that's how I was trained as a teacher. That's what we were told to use when I trained. That's what we were told to use as I grew up. And it's only been recently that we have switched over in the UK to identity first rather than person first. So, language changes. Language changes. One of the reasons that I'm interested in it. So I will probably use identity. No, I won't. I will probably use person first because that's what I'm used to using. I may switch to identity first because that's what I ought to use in a UK context. But thankfully, again, in a UK context, cognizant of my worldwide audience, it is kind of hard to get this wrong. This is also to say, of course, that within different English-speaking countries, different terms are preferred or accepted for different disabilities. And so throughout this, I will be using language that is preferred within the UK, because that's my own personal context. That's the language that I am most comfortable using while I'm kind of talking into what is kind of like the void, because I'm just here in the office aware that you guys are listening. But unless one of you talks to me, I'm not really having a conversation with you. And so just be aware that the terminology that I use today may be different to the terminology that you prefer to use, depending on where you are based. And that might seem quite complicated just to justify the terms that I'm using. And I understand that a lot of people at this point would go, well, if I've got to be so careful about what I say, why is this worth discussing? Why is this worth doing? And the fact is, it is worth doing. Because the words that we have are important. The language that we use is important. The old sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's not true. That is a lie. That's one of the first lies that we are taught as young children. Because the way that we talk about people, the way that we talk to people, it shapes how those people feel about themselves. But it also constructs the reality in which we live. The language that we use, the language that you use, the language that you allow yourself to use creates the world that you are in. It creates the version of yourself that you are portraying to other people. It creates the version of yourself that other people see. And so the language that we use is incredibly important. It is worth thinking about, and it is worth getting right.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded programme helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit AxiomMaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalised feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favourite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
So modern classrooms contain a wide spectrum of learners and of teachers. Remember we talked last week when we talked about the aesthetics of a classroom, about sharing the classroom, about how nomads teachers without their own classroom, but who pop into what would be considered other people's rooms, are becoming more and more common, kind of as class sizes increase, but there isn't the money to increase classroom sizes. It's becoming increasingly rare for a teacher to have ownership over a classroom and they're the only person that teaches in it. So we have to make sure that the environment in which our learners learn is accessible, is inclusive to a whole spectrum of people. Now, some of those needs that we may need to cater to might be clear. You know, if you have got a student who uses a wheelchair, that's a very obvious thing that you can and should make what's the word that I'm looking for? Accommodations for. However, not all disabilities are visible. Not all disabilities are obvious. Not all disabilities are disclosed. There is actually no legal compulsion for a person to disclose that they have a disability. And so you may look at your class and see 30 able-bodied pupils, but that doesn't mean that you are not teaching a disabled pupil. And so thinking about accessibility makes sure that we are covering those children who may not want to disclose their own disability, may not be aware of their own disability. It also helps the children who are not disabled. I saw a cartoon a couple of weeks ago, which again might be what planted the seed for this show in my head, and it illustrated my point way better than I could. It was a government building. There were stairs, there was a ramp, and it had snowed, and you had somebody out front with a shovel, clearly shoveling the snow. There was a crowd of people waiting to get into this building, and one wheelchair user. And the guy with the shovel was talking to the wheelchair user, and he said, "Wait a minute, I'm shoveling the steps so that all of these people can get in first, and then I'll do the ramp." It was something like that. The wheelchair user then said, "Well, if you clear the ramp first, we can all get in." So when we make accommodations for our disabled learners, for our teachers with disabilities, we're actually not just accommodating them, but we are giving extra pathways for all of our learners, for all of our teachers. So when considering the aesthetics of the classroom, when considering whether your classroom is accessible and inclusive, you are upgrading that accessibility, you are upgrading that inclusivity for everybody in that classroom, not just the one or two people who may obviously benefit from it. And let's also be real, it's not necessarily that they are benefiting from it, it's just that you are leveling the playing field. You are just making the classroom as accessible for them as for everybody else. Accessibility and inclusivity ensures equitable learning environments for all students and teachers. We are making sure that we have that equality. We have legal and ethical responsibilities under different laws. You know, different countries within the UK have different laws, different countries around the world have different laws, but we all have some kind of legal responsibility to make sure that our classrooms are accessible and inclusive. And we also promote academic success and participation for students who have disabilities and for able-bodied students. Okay, so again, it is a case of we are not prioritizing our disabled students. We are not giving them something special. We are making sure that all of our learners have access to the same level, the same quality, the same ease of education. When considering a classroom environment, we've got to consider the fact that disabilities can come in many forms. So when we think of disabilities, we often think of physical disabilities. We might think of wheelchair users. We might think of a deaf student. We might think of a student who walks with a cane. But legally, ethically, disability is quite a broad umbrella term because it also can include sensory difficulties. So, you know, I talked on the show last week when we were thinking just about aesthetics, about whether the amount of stuff on your classroom walls, your posters and everything, is that adding to cognitive load? But it might also be worth considering whether it's adding to sensory load. And with sensory, there are kind of very easy accommodations that can be made. I had a student a long, long time ago, back when I was first teaching, who had sensory issues around the feeling of paper. And, you know, this was back in the late 2000s. It would have been like 2008, 2009. So it was before kind of one-to-one devices were a big thing. Because these days you have a student who has a sensory issue with paper, then they can use their tablet, they can use their laptop, whatever. But back then it was much more difficult. So we came to an agreement with his parents. This was back when I was teaching primary, so it was a little bit easier. But I would do as many physical activities as I could. I would use as many kind of toys and plastic resources as possible. And when he had to use paper, because at that time it was kind of the only real option that we had, he would wear gloves. And then I also made accommodations, like I would make sure that he never was asked to hand out worksheets, because I didn't want him to have to put his gloves on and to make a show of the fact that he was wearing gloves while handling the paper. But I would ask him to hand out pencils so that he didn't feel left out. So, you know, sensory issues can be, can need a little bit of sensitive navigation. There are cognitive disabilities. There are psychological disabilities. There are learning differences. I think we're still having the discussion about whether ADHD counts as a disability, but as we are having more and more students diagnosed with ADHD, that's important for us to think about. There are all kinds of different disabilities that span this huge spectrum that we need to consider when we are thinking about whether our classroom is accessible and inclusive. Disabilities are not always permanent. Okay, they may be temporary. You've got a student who fell over, broke her leg while playing football on Sunday. She's on crutches. That's a disability, but eventually, hopefully, her leg will heal, she will get rid of the crutches, and she will walk again like she did before. That will be a temporary one. And so we may only have to make short-term accommodations for her. That would be different to a paraplegic child who you have in your classroom. But if those two children are in the same classroom, if you have made the accommodations and the accessibility for your paraplegic child, then your child on crutches won't need anything extra to accommodate her, because that's just already part of your classroom practice, because you are already making it accessible for everybody. Disabilities can be visible or invisible. So again, your child who uses a wheelchair, that may be a very visible disability. Your child with fibromyalgia, well, that's an invisible disability. And that's something that, again, you would need to make sure that you understood as the teacher and you were able to make what might be less obvious to us accommodations for, but accommodations nonetheless. Some students may choose not to disclose disabilities due to stigma. They don't want to be labelled as the disabled student. They don't want to be known as the boy with fibromyalgia. Or privacy concerns. They might think that it's nobody else's business. Or they may not know. Their parents may have had them diagnosed with something and may have chosen not to tell them. They may be undiagnosed. How many times do we see on social media people telling us that they have got ADHD but they are undiagnosed? Now, the extent to which you choose to accommodate self-diagnosis will depend on how you feel about self-diagnosis, and that's not a conversation for right now. But, it is something to think about. We may not think that we need to make accommodations in our classroom because we don't have a child with an obvious physical disability, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a disabled child in that classroom. There has, over the past few years, been a shift in perspective, which accounts for the shift in language that we talked about half an hour ago. So, up until relatively recently, there has been a medical model. Fix the student has been kind of the mentality. And if we are very honest, we may not want to admit this, but if we're very honest, that does still pervade when you think of some issues. How often have we had a student with ADHD and been glad when they've got their diagnosis and they've got medication? Or have thought, oh, that child really should be medicated to control their ADHD. That's a fix the student mentality. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Medication is not necessarily a bad thing. And again, a bit like I said when we were talking about the male role models before, because we have this extreme thinking in our society, we tend to think, right, we either love medication or we hate it. And we can't say medication can do some of the work and X, Y, and Z can also do some of the work. It's like with mental health. When I had my depression diagnosis, the first thing that my first doctor did was refer me to YouTube to watch some videos. And he gave me some self-help books because he didn't want to medicate me. He told me that it was better for me if I learned to manage my condition. It got to the point where I had learned a lot of the techniques, a lot of the CBT. I went through my therapy. I graduated from my therapy, but it wasn't enough. So I did still need the medication, and I am better for being on the medication. But I do also recognize that I use a lot of my CBT techniques. So both things are good. We don't need to demonize different ways of helping people, because if something works for somebody and it makes their life better, then it works and it makes their life better. And that alone means it's worth doing. So what we tend to have now is this social model. It's a fix the environment attitude. It's about eliminating barriers, which is, again, a good thing. It is a good thing. I think sometimes we get it wrong, because sometimes we eliminate a barrier that is not necessarily there, and we have a kind of proxy for inclusion. Sometimes we eliminate a barrier and it actually advantages people. Sometimes we eliminate a barrier instead of actually fixing the systemic problem. Again, because that's easier. And I'm not here this morning, because I've only got 28 minutes left of the show. I'm not here to fix all of society's issues when it comes to disability policy. So again, we are going to try and focus on the micro level, on just what we can do within our own classrooms. But there comes a point where we have to look at our entire system and go, does this work for everybody? If not, what can we do to change it? And if the answer is nothing, we have to ask why that's the case. Because otherwise, we are just kind of using sticking plasters over, or to fix, in inverted commas, problems, when we're just staying it, I suppose. So as I always did, I went to the literature. I love the literature. It's why I host Journal Club. And I found this really interesting article by Maria Conchetta Caruba. It was called Technology for Inclusion and Wellbeing in the Classroom. And so it was tech focused, but it did make me think a lot as well about the physical environment of the classroom. And so that's kind of what I'm going to use for the basis of our chat for the next 20-ish minutes. And the first thing that she talked about was this idea of universal design for learning, UDL. UDL is an educational theory, but it's also a practical guide for teaching. It's a guide that helps us to teach in ways that accommodate every student, and it uses tech at the heart of that. And in a nutshell, it promotes multiple means of engagement, multiple modes of representation, and multiple ways to act and express. So it's about giving all of your students as many different possible pathways to engage with the lesson. And again, let's be realistic here. That's not just going to be beneficial to your disabled student. It's going to be beneficial to all of your students. The downside, of course, is that because it's a theory, there are these very specific principles that you have to apply to it, that you have to understand, that you have to go through. So, it is, if you are interested in applying UDL to your classroom as a way of promoting inclusion and accessibility, you do have to go back and read up on it. You do have to go through the training. But if you use universal design for learning as your predominant method of teaching, and you do look at the range of different ways that the same information can be given out to pupils, and you do understand that some people prefer to listen via a podcast, whereas other people prefer to read, whereas other people prefer to talk it through. And you don't simplify it down into, in inverted commas, learning styles, because we all know that's nonsense. But you do make a range of different media available to your pupils, and you kind of then act as a facilitator, or you lead the discussion with the discussion group, or whatever it is that you as the teacher choose to do in your classroom at that time. You are, again, just making that accessible, and it's easy to do if you are in a one-to-one technology environment. I understand that that's not the reality for every teacher. It's a shame, because it should be. I am a huge proponent of making sure that we use technology in education, because I think we do our students a disservice when we don't. But I do understand that that's not a reality for everybody. And so, tech is not the big answer to everybody's issues. But applying the principles of universal design for learning, because it advocates a multimodal approach to teaching and learning, it does mean that we can make our messages as accessible as possible to as many of our learners as possible. The way that you manage your classroom is a key to inclusion. Studies show that even something as simple, and this is actually laughable that we need a study to show this, but I think it's important that studies do show things that we take as common sense, because common sense can quite often be wrong. But studies show that techniques such as with-itness, that is to say, knowing what is actually going on in your classroom, helps us to keep students engaged, and it helps to keep practices alive. Just by knowing and responding to what is going on in your classroom, you can create an inclusive environment. And I think this message is going to be particularly important for student teachers, for ECTs, for kind of current people in the final year of their undergrad degree, maybe a B.Ed or a BA in education with QTS who are going to start their first teaching job in September, or maybe you're at the end of your geography degree and you're going to go into your PGCE in September. You can deviate from your lesson plan. Deviating from your lesson plan is inclusion. If you realize that your lesson is not working for some of your students, okay? Responding to your students' needs within the moment, even if it's not what you spent 5 hours the night before writing down, that is inclusion, that is adaptive teaching, that is, as we used to call it back in the day, differentiation. So don't be afraid to do that. The reason that we write lesson plans, whether we are brand new teachers or whether we've been in the profession for a very long time, is to make sure that we have a roadmap for what we need to teach, to make sure that we are using our time deliberately, that we are using our time effectively, that we're not wasting our students' time. So you can kind of see your lesson plan as a bit of a checklist. I have to cover this, 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 and this. Or, I'm having to teach Franco in my A-level Spanish class, but I never studied Franco at university, and so I'm going to use my lesson plan to note down some of the important facts that I've got to cover so that I don't forget them. Okay, so your lesson plan there is an aide-memoire, if you like. It's not a script. And you are actually, if you have got an observer worth their salt, which mentors, line managers do tend to be, it's how they got to that position, they will understand that you have deviated from your lesson plan because you realized it wasn't working for a particular set of pupils, and they will give you credit for that because you've created an inclusive learning environment. Okay, so with itness might seem like common sense. It might just seem like having your eyes open while you're in the classroom, but it is amazing what effect can be had just by being aware of your young people.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded programme helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalised feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favourite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
We have a new follower. Hello, Ruthie. Really nice to have you here with us this morning. I hope you're enjoying the show. I hope that you are able to take a lot from it. Thinking about things that we might take for granted, but that are actually really useful tools for accessibility and inclusion. Everston and Weinstein came up with their 5 key actions for effective classroom management. And again, when we think of accessibility and inclusion, we don't tend to think of classroom management as being a thing, but it really, really is. There was an episode of the latest season of Abbott Elementary. It was a Christmas episode, and it featured a young Muslim girl in the kindergarten class who couldn't be in the Christmas show. She really wanted to be on stage and perform with her classmates, but she couldn't be in the show because it was Christmas. And so Mrs. Howard, the kindergarten teacher in the show, she changed the show completely from being a Christmas pageant to being a winter pageant so that this young lady could participate. And religion, of course, is not a disability, but if we're thinking about inclusion and accessibility, then something like that, just changing the focus from one thing to another, managing how you are framing your lesson, can be a good way to do that. It's a bit like I said before, when we were talking about language, talking about the way you use language, thinking about the way you frame your activities is really important. But the catalyst for this character in the show doing that was two young children in the class who teased the Muslim girl for not being able to be in the pageant. And Mrs. Howard, the teacher, overheard this. She intervened. She chastised the pupils, had them apologize, and then spoke to the little girl. Classroom management. This is what you do when you see two members of your class teasing another member. But in that instance, not only did she change her mindset, not only did she change the way that she was approaching the show to make sure that this little girl could be included, she was making sure that the little girl felt included, felt part of the class, by showing her that it would not be accepted for her classmates to tease her. So classroom management goes just beyond making our lives easier. It goes beyond making sure that nobody is hurt. And effective classroom management actually helps to promote, to create an accessible, inclusive working environment for our young people. So Evertson and Weinstein identified these 5 key actions for effective classroom management that, according to this study that I read, can be very effective in helping to promote accessibility and inclusion. So the first, we've got establishing caring and supportive relationships among students. We quite often get talked to about how we have to foster good relationships with our students, and it's all about the student-teacher relationships. But actually, there's a lot to be said about student-student relationships. Because as adults, hopefully, we understand that we live in a world that should be inclusive, where people should feel safe in their working environment, which is what school is for our young people. But our children don't always understand that. They haven't had necessarily that life experience. And part of our classroom management is to teach them that. And to make sure that they understand that how they speak to and about other people will have a consequence. Again, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is a lie. And it doesn't matter how many times we say it, that doesn't make it true. So making sure that we foster good relationships, not just between us and our pupils, but between our pupils, is incredibly important. Now, this is not to say that we need to make sure that our pupils all like each other, because they might not. You don't necessarily like everybody that you work with, but it's about making sure that we foster respectful attitudes between all pupils, that we encourage them to respect each other's humanity, that we encourage them to expect their right to exist, even if on a personal level they don't get on. The second action for effective classroom management is optimizing access to learning through instruction. If the children are able to access what they are supposed to be learning, then in theory, their behavior will be better. That's not always true, let's be honest. But 8 times out of 10, I would say it probably is. Encouraging student engagement in academic tasks, so keeping them on task. And again, if you use something like the Universal Design for Learning, where you are offering a lot of different pathways towards the same learning goal, and children can take that little bit more responsibility for their own learning, and the way in which they retain the information, then they are probably going to be more engaged. Just like adults, children do not like to be talked at. They do not like to be told, you've got to learn this because I say so. We make fun of writing the learning objectives up on the board, don't we? But that came from a good place. It came from trying to make sure that the children understood why what they were learning is important. And we kind of twisted it and just made it this tick box exercise to appease whoever was observing us on a given day. And we turned it into this joke. But actually, our students do need to know why they're learning what they're learning. They do need to know why the things that we are teaching them are important. And if we can't answer that question, then we should be asking the exam boards or the JCQ or whoever it is that has come up with the curriculum that you're following, why that curriculum is there in the first place. Because nobody wants to waste their time. And children are less likely to think that they are wasting their time, particularly in those middle years. I'm thinking particularly years 8 and 9, where they're not getting like a GCSE or anything out of the course that they're doing. They're a little bit more jaded than they were in primary. And so they're not necessarily loving learning for the sake of learning. But if you can explain to them why the information that you're telling them is important, if you can put it into a context, you need to know this because this will be helpful to you because this is interesting because, then it's going to keep them on board. It's going to make sure that they're engaged. And again, if we are thinking about our disabled pupils, let's think, for example, about our autistic pupils. Maybe they need to know why. Maybe they have a very rigid way of thinking that doesn't allow them to waste their time. It doesn't allow them to take in information that is trivial, that doesn't have a purpose. And so maybe they need to know why the thing that you are teaching them is important. So maybe, and I'm kind of, having my own little epiphany here, maybe writing up the learning objectives, we turned it into a joke. I've joked about it, but maybe we shouldn't. Maybe that is actually something that we should be taking seriously as a way of making sure our classrooms are inclusive and accessible. And it doesn't need to be a huge, great, big, long sentence that is copied down into the book. It could just be something that is pinned up on your wall saying, I don't know, it's important to learn to conjugate your verbs in the future tense so that you can have a conversation with somebody about what you're going to do next weekend. And just kind of thinking about how we frame our lessons, thinking about how we explain the importance of our curriculum to our young people, that can go a long way towards promoting inclusion and accessibility. The fourth of Evertson and Weinstein's 5 key actions was promoting the development of social skills and self-regulation. Self-regulation is becoming a huge thing in teaching at the moment. I'm seeing lots of things about emotional regulation. I'm seeing lots of things about, traffic light charts and encouraging children to explain to you how they are feeling. And we need to make sure that we are reciprocating by giving them the tools to self-regulate. That we are making sure that they're aware, I can't regulate you for you, but if you need to just nip outside and dance for 30 seconds, because then you will come back into my classroom and you will be calm and you will be focused, then that is absolutely what you're going to do. And in fact, I know that you need to do that because we've had that conversation. So all of my lessons start with a 30-minute dance break. 30 seconds dance break. Because if that helps Linda to regulate, then it might also help Percy to regulate. Apparently I teach in the 50s now. And there may be other children in that classroom where I don't know that they need to move their bodies in order to regulate, but they do. And again, this is something that we used to do way back in the day when we took brain breaks and when we did brain gym. And again, it was something that we ended up making fun of. And it was a tick box exercise. But I wonder whether quite often a lot of these things that become standing jokes in teaching and tick box exercises in teaching is because nobody ever explains to us why it's important. I wonder if it's because no one ever tells us our learning objective. And so we don't really take it on board because nobody explains to us why we need to know it. Maybe the CPD that we sat through on these things was not particularly inclusive and accessible, but we can be better than that, and our classrooms can be better than that. And finally, of course, there is our intervention. And again, this is where the with itness, where being aware of what's going on in your classroom, where that comes into play. Because showing all of our children that we do not accept language, behavior, jokes that are ableist, sexist, homophobic, whatever, that creates an inclusive learning environment. When we talk about accessibility and inclusivity, and to be honest, when I started planning this show, we tend to think about physical things, don't we? I said that this show was related to aesthetics. And when I was planning the show, I thought that the show would be about making sure that your wheelchair user can navigate your classroom. I thought that it would be about making sure that your walls weren't too overstimulating for your children with sensory issues. And those things are very important. But actually just the day-to-day running of our classroom, the language that we use, the behavior that we accept, the behavior that we visibly don't tolerate, that's equally important in making sure that our classrooms are accessible and inclusive. We have all the training on why you should use overlays, why you should use different colors of paper, all of that sort of thing. We talk about that a lot. That's very important. But when you're thinking about the accessibility of your classroom, when you're thinking about your adaptive teaching, or if you're old like me and you still think about your differentiation, include the language that you're using, include the behaviors that you are modeling, include what you are and are not willing to tolerate. Because all of those things are equally important. And again, we started this show and I planned this show thinking in terms of disability and accessibility. But given that we've spent a few minutes talking about misogyny, it's about that too. It's about making sure that we have a classroom where our girls feel safe and where we demonstrate that we are not willing to accept misogyny. We are not willing to accept homophobia. And we are demonstrating that that goes for everybody. And, you don't have to be a woman to stand up to misogyny. You don't have to be gay to stand up to homophobia. And in some cases, it's more powerful when it comes from the people that it doesn't directly affect. Because a student will assume that the female teacher is going to be upset by a misogynistic joke. They may not assume that the male teacher is going to be upset by it. So that's a very important boundary to be set. There we go. I was worried that I wouldn't have enough enough content to fill the show today, but I could keep going. So thank you very much, as always, for listening. I hope that you have all taken something from it, that you've thought about something to put into your practice as we go through. Tim has texted in, long-term friend of the show. Very glad to have you here. Thank you for texting. Tim has said, thank you for highlighting the sticks and stones thing. It's a massive lie. Perpetuating the myth is on a par with the name calling, in my opinion. Absolutely. Absolutely. Words are powerful. Words are incredibly powerful. And we don't take their power away by pretending that they're not. What we do is we stand up to them, and we recognize that power, and we stand up for the people that don't have it. I hope you all have yourselves a great week. I hope you have a really nice bank holiday on Friday. Whether or not you celebrate Easter, I hope that Friday is a good day for you. I will be back next Saturday with our next show, so I look forward to having breakfast with you then. Thank you all ever so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.